They made him stand at the gate while everyone else boarded, just because of his skin. Not because his ticket was wrong. Not because his name wasn't on the list. But because someone decided a black man couldn't possibly belong in first class. She looked him up and down like he was lost, asked to double-check his reservation even as it glowed green on the screen. Then they searched his bag for a smell no one else could sense, moved him to a different seat, and called it protocol. What they didn't know, this wasn't just any passenger. And by the time this flight touched down, their world would unravel from the inside. But it didn't start with revenge. It started with silence, with restraint, and with one man quietly watching as everyone around him showed exactly who they were. What happens next will make you rethink who's really in control when injustice takes off. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. We want to hear from you. And tell us, at what moment would you have stood up if you were there? Like, comment, and subscribe if you're ready to see what happens when power wears the wrong face and justice flies at 35,000 feet. Malik Turner adjusted his collar as he approached gate A19. His steps were measured, confident, his luggage sleek and minimal, like everything else in his life. The terminal lights gleamed off the polished tile as he moved through the sea of passengers with quiet precision. He wasn't new to flying. In fact, this was his third international trip this quarter. Zurich awaited, and with it, a merger that would shift the market. Novatech Systems had been his vision for 10 years, and now its global expansion was his mission. But as he reached the final checkpoint to board first class on Flight 247, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The gate attendant, a petite woman in her late 20s with a tight bun and corporate polished tone, took one look at Malik's boarding pass and frowned. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to wait right here." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem?" The woman didn't answer right away. She turned to whisper something to a nearby supervisor, an older man with silver hair and an overconfident gait. He walked over, clipboard tucked beneath his arm. "Name?" he asked curtly. "Malik Turner," he answered, offering his boarding pass and ID. "Seat 2A first class. Confirmed last month." The man didn't even look at the documents. "And how did you purchase this ticket?" Malik blinked, the question landing like an unexpected slap. "Excuse me. Did you use rewards points, a promotion?" "Just asking because we've seen anomalies lately. I paid in full. Corporate fare. Novatech Systems." His voice remained level, but the chill beneath it was starting to show. The supervisor's smile was thin and patronizing. "Ah well, you understand, sir. This isn't a usual seat assignment. It's rare to see early priority bookings like this from," he trailed off. "From people like me?" Malik offered, locking eyes with him. The man flinched just slightly. "Just following security protocol, sir." "Then apply it to everyone," Malik said evenly. "Not just me." It took another 5 minutes of forced silence before they finally let him through, with no apology, no explanation, and absolutely no acknowledgement of what had just occurred. He boarded the jet bridge without a word, pulse steady, expression unreadable. But the indignity wasn't over. As he stepped into the aircraft's entryway, another uniformed attendant intercepted him. "Sir, one moment, please. We've been alerted to a potential issue with your carry-on," she said, gesturing to the leather bag in his hand. "What kind of issue?" "There may be." "A scent," she said vaguely, nose wrinkling theatrically. "One of our staff detected an unfamiliar odor near your luggage. Could be a safety concern." Malik stared at her, then slowly unzipped the briefcase. Inside was a MacBook, 2 printed contracts, a leather-bound notebook, and a slim folder of client credentials. The attendant hovered over the open bag, breathing in as if auditioning for a perfume tester role. She murmured, sniffing again. "Strange. Maybe I was mistaken." "Or maybe," Malik said quietly, "you made a report without cause." She didn't answer. She simply gave a tight smile and nodded toward his seat. As he walked down the aisle, Malik noticed other passengers. No one else had their bags opened. No one else was sniffed for unfamiliar odors. The message was clear, even if no one had the courage to speak it out loud. You don't belong here, and we'll find a reason to remind you. He slid into seat 2A. The leather was cool against his back, but the burn in his chest hadn't faded. He knew better than to react. That's what they wanted. A scene. A confirmation. Something they could twist into a report that justified the prejudice. The moment Malik eased into seat 2A, he noticed something odd. Resting neatly atop the cushion, as if placed with purpose, sat a translucent waste bag, clean but unmistakably used, and beside it, a folded slip of paper. At first, Malik thought it might be a sanitation mistake. Maybe the previous flight crew forgot to clear the seat. But the note looked deliberate. He reached for it with practiced caution, unfolded it slowly, and stared at the words scrawled in neat black marker. Non-essential staff seat for service use only. The message wasn't printed on airline stationery, nor was it a typical maintenance label. It was personal, targeted, and unmistakably cruel. He glanced around the cabin, measuring reactions. No one met his eyes, but he could feel it, the tight smiles, the carefully averted gazes, the performative indifference. They had seen the note. Maybe someone had put it there while he was being interrogated at the gate. Maybe someone was watching now, waiting for his reaction. Malik folded the note in half and slid it into his briefcase, not because he intended to keep it, but because some truths were better documented than denied. With a controlled breath, he shifted the trash bag aside, reclaiming the space that was rightfully his. Moments later, as passengers continued to trickle into first class, a man in his early 60s approached seat 2C across the aisle. His Rolex glinted under the overhead lighting as he tucked his coat away and sat down with a loud sigh, immediately drawing attention. He had the aura of someone used to being heard, and within seconds He leaned toward a flight attendant and asked in a volume just loud enough to carry across the row. "Quick question. How exactly do upgrades work these days? I mean, is it mileage-based, or are we doing charity assignments now?" The attendant, a younger woman with soft eyes, looked startled. She smiled nervously and tried to move on, but the man pressed further. "No, seriously," he continued, voice rising slightly. "Is there some kind of humanitarian initiative happening? Just asking because it seems standards have broadened." The final word lingered in the air like poison. A few passengers chuckled under their breath. One man in the second row pretended to cough, but failed to hide his grin. Another woman murmured something to her husband, prompting him to glance in Malik's direction with a raised brow. Malik didn't respond. He didn't shift. He didn't even blink. But internally, the pressure coiled tighter. This wasn't about class anymore. This was about category. The subtle suggestion that he was an outsider, a diversity statistic, a token gesture, someone granted access, not someone who earned it. He had seen this script before. The language of condescension was fluent in corporate America, and apparently fluent at 38,000 feet too. A different attendant, this one older and clearly more experienced, approached with 2 glasses of sparkling wine. She handed one to the man in 2C with a gracious nod, and then turned to Malik. Her smile didn't quite touch her eyes. "Would you like something else instead, sir? Maybe a soda or juice?" she asked, tilting her head like she was speaking to a teenager. Malik looked at the champagne flute in her hand, then at her. "I'll have what he's having," he said flatly. "Unless there's a problem with that." Her lips tightened. "Of course not," she said and walked away. From the corner of his eye, Malik noticed the man in 2C watching him. "No offense," the man said unprompted, "but you look more like one of those tech guys who hacks the system than someone who actually flies it." His smile was smug, the kind of expression that assumed immunity from consequence. Malik finally turned to face him. "And you look like someone who inherited his company instead of earning it," he replied, calm as ever. The smile faded. The man opened his mouth, but thought better of it. Then the attendant returned with a glass of champagne, handed it to Malik without a word, and moved on. As the plane doors sealed and the safety briefing began, Malik stared ahead, jaw relaxed, but mind on fire. The seat he paid for had come with a price they hadn't put on the ticket. Dignity taxed, respect withheld, humanity questioned. The attacks weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They were calculated, cloaked in civility, wrapped in the soft fabric of elite entitlement. This was how exclusion looked at cruising altitude, clean, rehearsed, and smiled through. Malik, however, remained upright, fully alert, mentally cataloging each slight, each veiled insult, each condescending gesture that had occurred since stepping onto the plane. He wasn't paranoid. He was observant. Experience had trained him to read the air in rooms filled with wealth and whiteness. The smirks, the pauses, the passive-aggressive language that always stopped just short of openly saying, "You don't belong here." It was then that the man in seat 2C, whose earlier sarcasm hadn't landed the way he wanted, decided to escalate. He leaned across the aisle, a lazy grin spreading across his face, emboldened by an audience of silence. "You know," he said, swirling his champagne like it was a prop, "I've been flying this route for over a decade. I actually sit on the board of Delta's European Investment Group. VIP status, top-tier miles, real money in the game." Malik didn't respond. The man continued, now gesturing casually with his glass. "But these days, they just hand out upgrades to anyone who codes an app or hacks a loyalty system. Am I right?" The way he said it, "hacks a system," wasn't just a jab at tech. It was a dig at legitimacy. It was a carefully placed suggestion that Malik's presence was the result of gaming the rules, not earning a seat. Several passengers glanced up from their tablets, eyes flicking between the two men. Some smiled faintly. One woman in the front row gave a short, amused breath that was almost a laugh. Malik slowly turned his head, met the man's gaze, and said nothing. The silence was louder than a rebuttal, but inside, Malik felt the pressure building like cabin air before compression. He reached into his blazer pocket, pulled out his phone, not to argue, not to defend, but to record. Not even the screen, just audio. A simple voice memo. Documentation. Proof. That was all. Before he could tap the record button, a flight attendant appeared with the suddenness of a shadow. "Sir," she said quickly, her voice low but clipped, "we ask that you refrain from recording or using devices in this phase of the flight." Malik raised an eyebrow. "We're already at cruising altitude." She hesitated. "It's a security protocol, and it may be disruptive to other passengers." Malik didn't move. "I wasn't recording anyone, just making a note." She stiffened. "We've had a few complaints about disruptive behavior. I'm going to ask you to put your phone away, sir." Her tone shifted at the word sir, sharpened, formal, defensive. He knew what that shift meant. It meant she'd already decided who the problem was. Not the man who made the remark. Not the smirking passengers. Him. He returned the phone to his pocket without a word. There was no point in fighting a system that had already drawn its lines. Not yet. The man in 2C chuckled, pleased. "See? Protocol," he said with a wink, raising his glass in mock toast toward Malik. "Rules are rules." Malik stared ahead, his expression unreadable, but his mind was taking snapshots. Words, faces, reactions. He didn't need to win the moment. He just needed to outlast it. A few minutes later, the same attendant offered the man in 2C another pour of champagne without being asked. When she turned to Malik, her tone was cooler. "Would you like something else to drink, sir?" Malik declined. He wasn't interested in the performance of service anymore. What he wanted was clarity, and clarity was coming. Just not yet. As the in-flight dinner service began, Malik pulled out a pen from the side pocket of his briefcase and began scribbling notes in his journal. Code fragments, data architecture for an upcoming system rollout, ideas for a cybersecurity proposal. Not because he needed to, but because sometimes the best form of resistance is progress. And that notebook, to him, was sacred. Across the aisle, 2C watched with faint amusement. "Still working, huh?" he said. "That's the hustle life, I guess. Grind never stops, right?" Malik looked up briefly. "Something like that," he replied. The man leaned back with a self-satisfied grin. "Well, some of us can afford to relax. Perks of owning part of the company, I suppose." Malik offered a tight smile. "Must be nice inheriting what others build." The man's expression froze for a second, just a blink, but it was enough. Malik saw it. The hit had landed. His insinuations had laid a groundwork, and the silence that followed was laced with complicit agreement. No one challenged him. No one apologized. And Malik, though outwardly calm, could feel the gravity around him tightening like a noose, one formed not by confrontation, but by collusion. He was halfway through reviewing a detailed architecture diagram in his journal when the cockpit door opened and a uniformed figure emerged. It wasn't the lead flight attendant or another crew member. It was the captain. The shift in energy was instant. Conversations tapered. Passengers straightened in their seats. Authority had entered the cabin. Malik looked up, sensing before hearing that this visit wasn't routine. The captain walked directly toward him, bypassing others without pause. He was tall, late 50s, with a silver mustache and a rigid posture that suggested he was accustomed to control. He stopped just short of Malik's seat and cleared his throat. "Mr. Turner," he said, voice smooth but clipped, "I'm going to have to ask you to accompany me to another section of the plane." Malik raised his eyebrows. "Is there a problem?" The captain kept his expression neutral. "We've had a report of passenger discomfort. Some have expressed concern about inappropriate behavior and the use of unauthorized recording devices. Given our protocol, we're reallocating your seat." Malik blinked. "My behavior has been entirely professional. I haven't recorded anything, and I paid for this seat. Fully." The captain didn't blink. "We understand. This isn't punitive, just preventative. We found that sometimes guests unfamiliar with our frequent flyer system are better accommodated in a different section while we review the situation." The euphemisms were suffocating. "So let me be clear," Malik said evenly. "You're removing me from first class because someone feels uncomfortable with me sitting here?" The captain's jaw tightened. "I'm following operational protocol, Mr. Turner. I need your cooperation." Malik's hands remained still. "And if I refuse?" The captain nodded slightly to someone over Malik's shoulder. Two uniformed air marshals, previously unnoticed, stepped forward from the galley area. Tall, heavily built, faces blank as stone. One of them leaned down. "Sir," he said with that rehearsed tone of controlled power, "we strongly advise you to comply. Refusal to relocate may affect your boarding privileges, with our airline moving forward." It was both a threat and a promise. Malik understood the subtext. Refuse now, and you won't just lose the seat. You'll be labeled, flagged, blacklisted. A problem passenger. A liability, not because of what he'd done, but because of who he was. The cabin was quiet. Then, behind him, someone began to clap. A slow, sarcastic applause. Then, another joined in. A third. The applause grew louder, not celebratory, but performative, smug, almost gleeful. They weren't clapping for justice. They were clapping for confirmation. The man in 2C grinned like a man who just won a bet. Malik stood slowly. No anger, no tremor, just silence. He reached for his briefcase, closed his journal, and turned to face the captain. "This will be noted," he said. The captain didn't respond. Malik followed the marshals without a word, his steps steady despite the storm that roared inside him. As he passed down the aisle, he caught a glimpse of the economy section through the curtain, packed, cramped, loud. But that wasn't where they were taking him. They led him past the lavatories, past the galley, to a fold-down jump seat normally reserved for off-duty crew. It was cold, metal-framed, barely padded. "Temporarily," one of them said, as if that made it better. Malik sat without a word. No one offered him water. No one offered explanation. He sat there in silence, with nothing but the buzz of the engines and the faint sound of ice clinking in someone else's glass far behind him. And still, he said nothing, because he knew something they didn't. The cabin lights had dimmed for the dinner service in first class, but there was no service here. No one came to ask if he needed water. No one offered apologies or pretense. He was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. But invisibility had its advantages. From here, Malik could observe without being observed, listen without being scrutinized. And he did. He noticed the glances cast toward the back from the curtain that separated the elite from the expendable. He caught snippets of conversation, passengers speculating, chuckling, rationalizing what they had witnessed. They weren't discussing what had happened to him as injustice. They were packaging it as protocol, as discipline, as a justified correction of an unspecified violation. That narrative spread quickly, until someone interrupted it. The interruption came from seat 18B. A college-aged woman with thick braids, wireless earbuds, and a defiant tilt in her posture. She had seen the entire incident from across the aisle. She had taken out her phone the moment the captain stepped into first class. Now, sitting just a few rows ahead of Malik, she was broadcasting it live to her followers. Her voice was low but urgent as she whispered commentary beneath the audio of the exchange. "They're moving him," she said, "for nothing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even stand up until they forced him to. This is what it looks like. This is how they do it." Her scream caught the moment Malik was escorted out. It caught the smug clapping. It caught the racial undertones, the power dynamics, the arrogance. For a few minutes, that live stream spread like electricity. Shared, clipped, commented on. The woman's follower count jumped by hundreds as viewers tuned in, outraged, watching in real time as one man was exiled from luxury for daring to exist in it. But the system always responds. A flight attendant noticed her. A different one from earlier, older male, with a forced grin and a badge that read Operations Lead. He crouched next to her row, leaned in with a voice too soft for anyone else to hear. "We don't allow video recording on this flight," he said. "You'll need to delete that immediately." The woman narrowed her eyes. "I know my rights," she said. "I'm not recording a crew member's private conversation. This is public." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't about rights, miss. It's about security. And if you won't comply, we'll need to report you upon landing. You could be placed on a no-fly list." The threat was clear, wrapped in corporate language, cold as steel. The woman hesitated, jaw clenched, then reluctantly ended the stream. The man stood, still smiling. "Thank you for understanding." He walked away, as if he'd done something noble. Malik saw the entire thing. He didn't need to hear the words to know what had happened. He saw the phone drop slowly into the woman's lap. He saw the tension in her shoulders. And in that moment, something inside him shifted, not with rage, not with sadness, but with strategy. They weren't just trying to silence him. They were silencing witnesses. Eventually, a flight attendant approached with a rehearsed expression. "Mr. Turner," she said, "we've made arrangements for you to sit in an open seat further back in the cabin. It's more comfortable than where you are now." Malik followed her down the narrow aisle until they reached the very rear of the plane. Not business class. Not even mid-economy. The last row, just across from the bathroom, where the smell of disinfectant mingled with jet fuel. The seat was stiff, fixed upright, tucked next to a service cabinet that rattled slightly with turbulence. She gestured for him to sit, then left without another word. What consumed him now wasn't discomfort, but precision. For the last 20 minutes, he had mapped the situation like a system exploit, cataloging weak points, decision nodes, and liability trails. It was no longer about indignity. It was infrastructure. And Malik Turner didn't just build software, he built frameworks to destroy what was corrupt and rebuild what was broken. He reached into the lining of his jacket and tapped twice on the side of his watch. A faint vibration responded. Then, without alerting anyone, he slipped a wireless earpiece into his right ear and began to speak, voice so low it barely moved his lips. "Activate level 3, he said, the words measured like a switch flipped in a server room. "Internal systems audit. I want to trace on all Delta SecureNet logs in the last 30 minutes, especially terminal gate activity and onboard seat remap overrides. 10-minute window. Begin internal comms scan for flagged keywords. Priority override, passenger relocation, behavioral note, class escalation." He paused, eyes fixed on the seat in front of him, as if he were simply lost in thought. Then he added, "Send a remote alert to corporate compliance. Flag, emergency protocol, pattern match C." There was no confirmation sound, no voice reply, but he knew it had begun. He didn't need to press send. Black Nova's back-end systems had been built with zero-latency command chains. And he was still CEO. farther forward in the aircraft, in the staff galley near row 22. A male crew member dressed in a gray logistics vest glanced down at a strange alert on his internal tablet. His brows furrowed. He tapped once, twice, then froze. His complexion drained almost instantly as the name Turner, Malik, appeared next to an admin-level systems trace request. Next to it, a blue-coded alert labeled Black Nova, override registered. Class 3 authority confirmed. He looked up, scanning the cabin instinctively, then back to the tablet. The system had just been tapped from inside the flight, not by ground control, not by maintenance, but by someone with executive access. His voice cracked when he turned to the flight coordinator behind him. "You know that guy they moved to the back? Row 39? I think that's Malik Turner, from Black Nova." The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly not following. "The guy from the tech company?" He shook his head rapidly. "No, the guy. The one who wrote the backbone we used to run SecureNet inventory routing. If he's flagged an override." "This is bad." She blinked, trying to process. "Wait, that system runs through our maintenance servers, right?" The man was already pulling out his phone, fingers trembling slightly as he whispered, "We need to notify Ops now." Back in row 39, Malik sat with the calm of a man who had just tipped the first domino in a chain he designed. He wasn't calling for revenge. He was initiating accountability. A ripple was already forming in the digital infrastructure of the airline. Data logs being mirrored to Black Nova's legal team. System overrides being archived. Facial recognition logs tracing the moments when he was flagged, rerouted, moved. Every click, every keystroke, every comment tied to his name was now preserved. Immutable and admissible. Somewhere in the front, a flight attendant adjusted her collar uncomfortably, unaware of the exact moment when the story had shifted from humiliation to high alert. From behind the curtain in business class, a junior technician seated on standby glanced at his monitor and saw that the Wi-Fi signal had automatically throttled. Another sign of background protocol adjustments. He muttered under his breath, "Someone's running a diagnostic. Who the hell's got that kind of access up here?" Next to him, a maintenance analyst opened his screen, spotted the same anomaly, and said nothing, but quietly removed his name badge and stuffed it into his laptop bag. Malik remained in his assigned punishment seat near the humming lavatory door, eyes closed not in sleep, but in a composure so measured it felt unnatural in its serenity. Around him, passengers shuffled, tightened belts, powered down devices. The turbulence outside was minor, but what stirred inside the cabin had already begun to tremble at its foundations. 3 rows ahead in economy, a young man in his late 20s flipped open his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he double-checked slides for a presentation scheduled just hours from now. He wore a lanyard from Delta Global Ventures, and his screen, bright bold, displayed the opening title of a pitch deck in large blue font, Strategic Integration Summit Zurich 7 a.m. Keynote. Mr. Malik Turner, CEO, Black Nova Software. The woman seated beside him glanced over out of curiosity, then raised her brows. "Wait, did you say Malik Turner? He's on this flight." The man chuckled. "Yeah, some big deal meeting with our executive board. I heard they're about to announce a joint platform with our security division. Guy's a legend." His voice wasn't hushed. It wasn't meant to be. It carried just far enough to land in the ears of a flight attendant walking through the aisle with a clipboard. She paused mid-step. At that same moment, in the forward crew galley, a junior flight support assistant was loading documents into the built-in compact printer used for custom summaries. Among the files sent from corporate HQ was a confidential slide packet printed in error, bearing the title Black Nova Executive Arrival Priority Clearance Required. On the second page, highlighted in red, was a headshot of Malik Turner. Below it, Speaker Corporate Strategy Panel Restricted Access Badge. Level A subject to NDA, do not delay. The attendant froze as the printer hummed and spat out the sheet. Her eyes darted to the face on the paper, then to the small status panel where Malik's name had just been logged in the flight system under an irregular incident report. Her throat dried instantly. She turned to her colleague nearby, barely whispering, "Do you know who that is?" The other woman looked confused. "Passenger 39E. Yeah, the guy who got moved." The assistant's voice cracked. "He's not just some guy. He's the CEO of the software company that runs our entire logistical chain. He's the keynote speaker at the Zurich Executive Conference tomorrow morning. The same one we're flying aboard to." The color drained from both their faces. Back in first class, the man in 2C was asking for another scotch when his tablet pinged. It was a company-wide memo, just pushed from Delta's Zurich division, detailing the confidential arrival of Black Nova's principal executive. He frowned, clicked it open, then froze mid-sip. The name, the picture. The realization hit him like a slap, and suddenly, the scotch didn't taste as good. "Turner," he muttered. "Malik Turner?" He looked toward the curtain separating first from the rest of the cabin and remembered the face he had mocked, the voice he had tried to bury in snide remarks and applause. It wasn't just a passenger. It was a power broker. And worse, he was still on board. Word spread through the crew like wildfire. One attendant pulled the purser aside in the galley, shaking. "We just moved the keynote speaker of the Zurich Forum to a seat by the restroom. The guy we thought didn't belong? He's the owner of the system we use to track cargo, staff assignments, everything. He owns the IP we're licensed under." The purser turned pale. "We filed a complaint report against him. With his name." Her voice wavered. "He has access to our internal systems. He could destroy our contract with a single call." The other attendant added, "He already made one. Quietly. 5 minutes before we hit cruise." Their silence turned into a quiet dread. Malik remained seated, motionless, as the plane taxied, his eyes calm, but behind them, calculations continued. He knew the moment the jet bridge docked, everything would shift from passive pressure to public exposure. As the doors opened and light flooded the front cabin, a flurry of sudden activity overtook the crew. The captain exited the cockpit early, walking with forced confidence toward the front of the aircraft, but no one met his eyes. A senior gate agent waited just outside the entryway, earpiece blinking red, sweat already gathering at his collar. The tablet in his hand showed an emergency alert just released from Black Nova's Zurich office. Security briefing. Incident of class bias and internal breach, executed audit findings, pending legal review. Next to it, a timestamp. Less than 1 hour ago. Meanwhile, across the tarmac in the private terminal, executives from multiple partner companies were arriving early for the conference scheduled the next morning. But instead of small talk and espresso, they were met with chaos. Their phones pinged in unison with breaking headlines. Tech CEO discriminated against by airline partner on live flight. Delta faces backlash after mistreating VIP on international route. And most damning of all, Malik Turner, Black Nova CEO, silently triggers internal investigation midair. And everyone missed it. The embedded video clips, though grainy, were enough to confirm what happened. One in particular, captured before it was deleted and later recovered, showed the moment Malik was escorted away from his seat while others clapped. It spread like wildfire. Within hours, hashtags began to trend. Hashtag seat for sale, hashtag Delta disgrace, hashtag justice for Malik. Tech CEOs from rival firms retweeted with thinly veiled threats. We stand with accountability. Culture starts at altitude. VC firms quietly began instructing their analysts to pull partnership data. One European logistics platform tweeted, "We are halting all current API integrations with DeltaNet until further notice." A popular diversity-focused investing group posted a joint statement, "We will not work with platforms that normalize exclusion." By the time Malik stepped off the plane, last as if symbolic, the arrival terminal was already crawling with quiet tension. No camera crews, no press, just silence. But the gate agents' faces were pale. Some whispered, some averted their eyes. One senior operations lead looked at his tablet and muttered, "They cut us off. Black Nova just suspended our back-end sync." In the command center 2 floors above, IT staff stared at blinking warnings. Routing errors, API connection timeouts, live tracking interruptions. The airline's internal communications had gone dark where it counted most. At corporate HQ, located less than 5 miles from the terminal, Delta's executive board had convened an emergency closed-door meeting. In it, a screen showed live analytics, stock price graph nosediving 13% in real time, social sentiment at an all-time negative, emails flooding their compliance inbox, and worst of all, legal threats from 5 major software vendors, all citing breach of ethical protocols and contract reassessment. "We cannot hold this line," one board member said, voice flat. "This is hemorrhaging." The CEO, a sharp-suited man who had been untouchable for nearly a decade, sat silent, face ghostly as the decision was read aloud. Immediate resignation demanded. The word optics had been used 37 times in the last hour. By the end of the meeting, he was gone. Back at the airport, passengers began receiving notifications on their Delta app. Some saw service refunds. Others saw formal apologies. A few VIPs were discreetly pulled aside and offered compensation flights and gift packages. But for Malik, no one approached. No one dared. He walked the length of the terminal alone, his carry-on rolling beside him, the only sound his steps against the polished floor. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, filled with consequence, filled with realization. The first to fall was the man in seat 2C, identified through multiple blurry photos and a short clip taken before the live stream was removed. Internet sleuths, efficient and relentless, matched his face to LinkedIn profiles, board meeting headshots, and a podcast interview from 2 years ago where he'd bragged about his unfiltered approach to leadership. His name, Richard Halvorson, CFO at a mid-sized finance firm with government defense contracts, became trending topic fodder. Screenshots of his smug grin mid-flight were captioned with words like entitled, racist, and walking lawsuit. Someone found his company's general inbox. Someone else found the investor emails. Within hours, over 25,000 complaints had been logged. By the end of the third day, his firm released a terse public statement. Mr. Halvorson's comments and actions on Delta Flight 247 do not reflect the values of our organization. Effective immediately, he is no longer employed. The statement ended with a link to their diversity policy, which crashed within minutes due to traffic. He didn't go quietly. A leaked email showed him trying to frame the situation as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But even fellow executives wouldn't back him. Clients began pulling accounts, quietly at first, then with loud justification. One of their biggest contracts, ironically tied to aviation security software, was pulled overnight. And Richard? He was left jobless, reputation torched, name blacklisted not by corporate decree, but by public rejection. But he wasn't alone. Lauren Reed, the flight's lead attendant, whose name badge had been visible in too many clips to deny, became the second domino to fall. Passengers who had witnessed her handling of Malik's seating situation, her tone, her language, her refusal to listen, began speaking up. Not just online, but through formal complaints. One came from a retired judge who'd been seated 2 rows back. Another from a school principal who wrote in detail about how the incident reflected a dangerous culture of power abuse veiled behind service miles. By the end of the week, a petition calling for Delta to restructure discriminatory training standards had gained over 600,000 signatures. Her face appeared in a viral meme titled Most Hated Employee of the Month, complete with a Photoshop crown and burning Delta logo. An internal investigation, fast-tracked under media pressure, concluded that her conduct lacked procedural neutrality and professional restraint. She was terminated the following morning. The airline didn't name her in their release, but the internet already had. She tried to fight it, tried to issue a half-hearted apology via a PR rep. "I've worked for 22 years and never intended to cause harm." But the damage was irreversible. Her image was cemented as a cautionary tale, not just of individual bias, but systemic rot. Former colleagues came forward anonymously, admitting this wasn't her first incident. One called her a gatekeeper who chose who was worthy based on appearance. Another said she enjoyed control more than service. Neither claim surprised the public anymore. The pressure on Delta intensified. Shareholders demanded deeper cultural reform. The board created a temporary ethics division, appointing an interim leader known for rooting out internal bias. Internal messaging policies were revised overnight. Crew training protocols were put under third-party audit. But none of it could rewrite the story that had already been told, that had already reached millions, that a man who had every right to sit in seat 2A had been pushed aside not because of an error, but because of an assumption. And those who made it were being made an example. But not everyone involved acted with malice. Grace, the junior attendant who had hesitated when ordered to remove Malik, was quietly reassigned. She received an internal commendation for compliance under duress, but her request to be moved off the Zurich route was granted. Some say she cried after the flight. Others say she tried to check the manifest, but was shut down by her superior. Either way, she disappeared from the story, her name protected. Meanwhile, internal tech logs at Delta continued to flash with quiet panic. Malik's digital footprint remained flagged, not as a threat, but as a priority. Every note, every system he touched, every line of access his name passed through was marked and saved. The audit report he triggered mid-air had already been sealed and forwarded to the airline's global legal team. Richard Halvorsen hadn't left his apartment in days. The blinds stayed shut. His phone buzzed constantly. Missed calls from former colleagues, media requests, and 1,000 unread emails, all screaming the same thing: consequence. He had deleted his LinkedIn. His professional website now led to a blank 404 page. And yet, what haunted him most wasn't the headlines, it was the video. The 10 seconds where he clapped as Malik Turner was escorted away. The sneer on his face. The way the camera had captured the joy in his eyes as he watched another man be humiliated. That was the image that lived on across the internet. And it haunted him, not because it cost him his job, but because he had finally watched it through someone else's eyes. Late one night, sleep-deprived and desperate, Richard sat at his desk and recorded a video. No script, no PR team, just his voice. "I got it wrong," he said. "What I did wasn't just disrespectful. It was inexcusable. I saw a man who challenged my sense of place, and instead of asking why he made me uncomfortable, I punished him for it. And I'm sorry." He uploaded the video. Then he reached out to the only place he thought might understand what he was trying to do. Ascend Beyond, a nonprofit initiative founded by Black Nova, focused on social equity in corporate leadership. He didn't ask for a job. He asked for a chance to learn. To the surprise of many, Malik responded. Not personally, but through his foundation. A simple email: "We believe in accountability. We also believe in growth. Orientation begins next month." Richard didn't know what to expect, but he showed up, sat in the back of the room, took notes, said nothing, for weeks, until someone finally asked him why he was there. He replied, "To become someone I wouldn't have clapped for." That moment, quiet and untelevised, marked the first time he was seen again, not as a villain, but as a man trying to change. Elsewhere, Lauren Reed, former lead attendant, had gone underground after her firing. For a while, she blamed everyone but herself. The internet, the passengers, even Malik. But silence has a way of forcing confrontation, and isolation makes mirrors unavoidable. It wasn't until a former co-worker sent her a link to a workshop titled Inclusion at Altitude that she paused. The event was run by a flight equity coalition, sponsored by Black Nova, hosted at an aviation training center just 20 minutes from her home. She attended out of curiosity. She stayed out of something else: remorse. She listened to stories of crew members who faced bias, passengers who were denied dignity, and fellow flight leaders who had committed the same sins she had. For the first time, she saw herself not as a scapegoat, but as a symptom. And she decided she wouldn't stay one. A year later, she stood at the same podium, delivering part of the curriculum. She didn't hide her story. She opened with it. "I was that flight attendant," she would say. "And I'm here because someone gave me the space to admit it and the tools to change it." The crowd didn't always clap, but they listened, and that was enough. Meanwhile, Malik Turner continued his work, not as a man seeking revenge, but as a builder of systems meant to outlast pain. His story wasn't a viral campaign or a victory lap. It was a foundation. He expanded Ascend beyond into 3 new cities. He funded training programs across 2 major airlines. And every now and then, at the end of a long day, he'd receive an email from someone like Richard or Lauren, or even a former passenger who once looked away but now wanted to see. And Malik always answered. Forgiveness, to him, was never soft. It was never forgetful. It was earned through discomfort, through showing up again and again until the wound becomes a scar, and the scar a mark of who you used to be. As for Delta, the airline emerged from the crisis slower, changed. Internal policy reforms became public. They embedded Black Nova's DI framework into their core systems. Not because they were afraid, but because they had learned, painfully, publicly, that access without equity is just optics. And so, in a small room above the Zurich skyline, a year to the day after the infamous flight, Malik stood quietly at the end of another training session. The group before him was mixed, young, old, new employees, former skeptics. In the front row sat Lauren. In the second, Richard. Both listening, both nodding. Malik didn't speak for long, just enough to close the loop. We can't undo harm, he said, but we can end its legacy if we're willing to face it, name it, and do better. They didn't clap. They stood. The end. Enjoyed the story? Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Which part of the story hit you the hardest? Was there a moment that made you pause or reflect? And hey, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. We'd love to know.